Hello everyone. Good evening. So I hope everyone had a wonderful day. Let me share my screen. So welcome to the day 7 of React. So today it's gonna be the last day of React. So today most of the topics which we are gonna cover is, so we'll go through what are controlled and uncontrolled components, and then we will see how to use routing, and then at the last we will see how to fetch an API from the backend, and then how to set up a Redux toolkit. So I want every one of you guys to finish the calculator project. So as of now, we created two projects, right? So one was in Angular, we created a student management project. So yesterday we created a calculator object using React. So I want every one of you guys to revisit the video, and then I want you guys to practice so that you'll get a rough situation or else rough idea about how the React application works. Okay. So today we'll start with what is routing. So we in Angular also we went through what is routing, right? So what was routing? So routing means I'll just go through the React documentation itself. Just type React. So this is the React's official documentation website. So here, if you want to learn React, you can go through their own documentation itself. I'll see. You can see as of now, about the browser, you can see it is empty, right? As soon as I click on this learn, you can see there is a URL added learn. And if I click on how do I manage state, it will click on manage state. So you can see as I interact with the components, the URL gets added, right? So similar way we did in Angular also, right? We created a component and then we attached a route for it. Similar way in React also, we'll do the same thing. Okay, so first is open your VS Code. So in the yesterday project itself, I'll create another folder. I created a folder name called as routing gap. And then you need to hit on enter. So now once this is done, you need to create a new project. So how do you do that? Right click, open an integrated terminal. And then now you need to type the command. So what is the command? npm create space white at latest. Okay. And then hit enter. So now what this will do? This will start creating a React application. It'll ask what is your project name. I'll just give routing. And then it'll ask to this to select the framework. So I need to choose React using the down arrow key and then JavaScript. Now you can see it will say to run the three commands. So what I'll do, just copy, paste it inside terminal, hit enter, and then the second command, copy it, paste, hit enter. So it will start installing. By the time we'll go through the PPT. So here you can see in Angular, the routing was inbuilt, okay, because Angular is a framework, but React is a library, right? So you don't have everything inbuilt. So if you want to use routing in React, you need to install something called as React Router DOM. Okay, so this is from this, we will start using our routing. So say, for example, if you want to go through any node packages, so you know NPM, right? What is NPM? Node Package Manager. So if you want to know more about the package, you can visit NPM. So inside NPM, you can type whichever package you want to see. React router DOM. It says here itself. React. Click enter. You can see React router DOM. And you can see it will also give which command you need to run to use this package. And then you can see there will be some documentation and all for this. Okay, so this is how you can check your packages in node modules. So now I'll see whether, yeah, my npm modules has been successfully installed. So now I'll run the application. So how do I run this? Npm run dev. So now I'm running my React application successfully. So now I got the local host, right? I'll copy and paste it in the browser. So now what I need to do, I need to clean up this, right? So how do I do that? First, I'll go to my src, app CSS, Control A, remove everything. and go to your index.css, Control A, remove everything, and then app.jsx. Here, what you need to do, you need to remove everything inside your app. Because all this is called as a boilerplate code. So we don't need this temporary code and all. So now I'll just remove this three things. Now you can see our React application is fresh. So now how do we create a routing? So first is I'll create a header component. Okay. So how do I create components? Right click, new folder. In the new folder, I'll create components. Okay. In here, I'll create a component called as header. So how do you do that? A component starting name should be capital, right? HEADER dot JSX. This is the extension on how to create a component. So, and then what is the shortcut I said to generate a component? RAFCE, right? RAFCE, and then hit on enter. Now you got the header component. So now here what I'll do is I'll just create a nav and then I'll add some links to it. So now first I'll create a unordered list. Inside unordered list, I'll create a list items. One is home. Second is about. Third is contact us. So now you can see in my browser, there's nothing up here. There's nothing, right? So how do I render this? I need to call this inside my root component. So I'll go to my root component. I'll call header here. So now if I see in the browser, you can see it is my header has been successfully rendered. So now what I need to do is, as I click on this links, I need the components to be rendered here. So how do I achieve that? So for that, first we need to create these three components, right? So let's start creating those components. So one is home, right? Home.jsx and then RAFCE. So I'll just create home page. So then I'll create another component. This is about.jsx and then RAFCE. So here I'll just write about page. So the third one is about contact, right? Contact.jsx. So now what you have to do, RAFCE. Then I'll rename it as contact page. Okay. So now what I need to do, you need to install which package? React router DOM. So for that, whenever you try to install a package, right, what you need to do is you need to stop the terminal and then you need to install the package and then rerun. Okay. So now what if you want to stop the terminal, right, you should have to press Control C. Control C means it will terminate your terminal. And then you need to install this command. So what is the command? npm I react router DOM. I'll show the command in the PPT. This is the command, react router DOM. Okay. Once you install this, you can see it has been installed. So now I'll rerun my application. So what is the command? npm render. So now, yeah, it's running. I'll refresh this. Yeah, now it's working. So now what I need to do is, first is whenever you install this package, you'll be able to access three things. One is browser router, second is routes, third is route. I'll say what it is. So first, whenever you install React Router DOM, first you need to extract a component called as browser router. This browser router is used to wrap around the root component, which app component. The second is you need to define routes. Routes acts like a cover around the route. You understood this? So rather than the theory, we'll see in practical now. Okay, so just you should know what are the components you'll be get access through React Router DOM. One is browser router, second is routes, and then third is route. Using these three itself, you can create routing in your React application. So how do I do that? First, browser router should be wrapped around the root component. So now I'll go to my root component. So where is my root component? App.jsx. But where is app.jsx defined? I mean, like, where is it called? Inside the main.txt, right? You can see here. Here it's being called. Okay, my app.jsx is defined here, but where it's being called as a component here. So now what I need to do, I need to wrap this browser router around this app component. So what do you mean by wrapping? So first is you need to import browser router. How do you do that? Click on import from string React. So first is the syntax is import flower brackets from React router DOM. You need to select the third one. Okay, once you select this, now I need to import a what? Browser router. You can see. Once I can access this browser router, what I need to do, I need to wrap it around app. So how do I do that? You can see there is a string mode, right? Strict mode. This is wrapping. Similar way, I need to wrap this browser router. So how do I do that? I'll come to next line. Here, I'll call the browser router. Once I call this, you can see I got the starting and ending tag. So inside here, I'll copy paste my app. Okay. This is the syntax on those. This is the first step. I'll add a comment here. This is the step one on how to set up the routing. Step one is you need to import browser router, which is inside React router DOM, and then you need to wrap it around your application. The reason why we are wrapping is, so once you wrap here, since app is the root component, all the browser routers and all, I'll be able to access inside the application. So now the second component is routes and route. So how do I define this? The syntax on how to use these two components is, first, once this step one is done, the step two. For that, you need to come to your app.jsx. So inside app.jsx, first you need to import. So what do I need to import? You can see in the PPT, first is routes and route. I'll say what's the purpose of that. First, try to import it, and then flower brackets from, which is a React router DOM. So what do I need to first import? Routes, right? Routes, comma, route. Yeah. So now what does route does is, it will render the first route that matches the current location. That means this route will wrap different route. So based on which route gets triggered, this routes will match and it will render that component. So what do I mean by that practically? So here after the header, once you imported routes and route, you need to call this components. So how do you call a component? Using this syntax, right? ROUTES. So once you do that, you need to not self-close. So this is called as self-closing syntax. But this component, you are not self-closing. You are creating two starting and ending tag. So inside here, you need to create your route. So don't get confused by the names. This name sounds similar, but routes means it will act as a wrapper. Route means it is an individual component. All these are components because we saw in the earlier version of the PPT. So everything in React is a component. So you don't have something called as directives and all. So here everything is a component. So here also this is a component. This is a component. So in browser router is also a component. So everything is a component in your React. So once you import this routes and route, what you need to do is first you need to call routes, and then inside routes you need to call a route. Okay, so every route takes two attributes. You can see route, it is used to define path and the component. So this concept we went through in Angular also, right? So we created a path and we attached a component. So similar way in React also, you need to create a path. What is, I'll just give slash. And then which element I need to attach it is equals to home. So I need to call my home component here. Okay, similar way, I'll create another path. So for every path and element, you need to create a different route. And then this route should be wrapped around your routes. So don't get confused by route and routes. Routes acts as a wrapper, route is an individual component. So here I'll create a route. This route is a self-closing component. So here I'll create a path. So here is path slash about. And then what is the element? My about element, about component. You need to call your component here. So this is the syntax. You can't just type home here. You need to call that component. Okay, second route is path slash contact. So now element is equals to, I need to call my contact component. So now we have set up our route. So now we will see whether this is accessible or not. So now we can see if I click on, you can see by default it is saying home page. So I'll try to add some data here. So I added some dummy data here. So now if I go to home, you can see by default slash means it goes to home page. If I click on slash about, it goes to my about page. You can see here. Then if I click slash contact, it goes to my contact page. But now if I click on this is not working, right? So what I need to do here, it's working, but this is a manual work. But I want it to work when I click on this links. So how do I do that? In React, there is something called as link component. Here, you can see here. So this link will act as a anchor tag. So you guys would have been familiar in HTML. So whenever you want to use a link, there is something called as a tag, right? So in similar way, in React, you have something called as a link tag. So this link tag will take a property. So what are the properties? Two. If you compare this to your anchor tag, in anchor tag, whenever you want to create a link, you use href. But in link tag, you need to use two and then specify the path name. So let's see how this will work. So now we have successfully created our routes. This is the syntax on how you create your routing in React. First, you need to wrap the browser around the app component. And then second one, you need to create routes and then define route with path and element. So now let's start linking our application to this. Okay, so how do I do that? So first you need to go to your header. What do you need to import? Link tag, you can see here, right? So now what I'll do, I'll just import it inside my React router DOM. So import from React router DOM. So what do you need to import? Link tag, right? So just specify that link. So now once this is imported, so now what I will do, this link tag will act as your anchor tag. So now inside home, give a space here and then call your link tag component. Okay, so now copy paste this home inside your link tag. Okay, similar way do for about also. First call your link. This should be a starting and ending tag, not a self-closing tag. Okay, so now copy paste this. Similar way do for contact also. So here copy this full thing, Control X and then Control V. So now what does the link tag contain? Other property? It's called as to, right? So now with to, what I will do, I will set my path. So what is my home path? You can see here my home path is slash. So what is my about path? I'll copy this path slash about. So now I'll go to my header. Inside this to, I'll give slash about. And then what is the path to my contact page? I'll go to my JSX. You can see here slash contact. So I'll copy this, go to your header, and then using to now paste. So now you can see I have successfully linked my text with the link tag. So what is the syntax? So first you need to import it from the React router DOM. Second, you need to use these three properties to mark, like for example, you can see here, whatever path is here, this should be matched here. So now if I click on see, if I click on here, it goes to home page. If I click on about, it will go to my about page. If I click on contact us, it goes to my contact page. Now you understood this. So this is how you set up the routing inside your React application. So this is just the basic level of routing. So in routing, you have so many concepts. So up to this, it's fine. Okay. So this is how you'll set up. So I'll just go through the process again. First, you need to import React router DOM. You need to wrap around app with your browser router. And then inside your app.jsx, you need to use routes. Routes acts as a wrapper for your route. Each route define a path and then an element. So how do I link this element? You need to go to that element. And then here you need to use a link tag. So once you use a link tag, you need to create a to property. So this to property takes the path. So whenever you click on this about, this path gets triggered. Once this path gets triggered, then we will see whether the path is matching. So whatever path is matching, this element gets rendered. So this is how routing works in your React application. You understood this? So now we will see what are controlled and uncontrolled components. So this is very simple. So controlled components means all your input data is managed by the state. Uncontrolled means your input data is managed by a hook called as useRef. Understood this? So now let's just see the syntax on this. If you want to go through this, I'll share the PPT with the ma'am. You can take the PPT. So, but this is your practical classes. So I'll just, rather than reading this theory out, I'll just show in the code itself. Okay. So here you can see what I'll do is, inside the component itself, I'll create two components. Control.jsx, and then I'll create another one. Control.jsx. So now I created two components here. One is controlled and uncontrolled. So now I'll create RAFCE. Okay. So now let us see what is a control component. So control component means your React form data is handled using state. Okay. The reason why we have two different things is whenever you handle your form data using state, that means your forms will be more interactive. So whenever there is a change in a state, what does React do? It re-renders, right? That's the reason. But while as an uncontrolled component, you do not use state to handle your form data. You use something called as useRef. So useRef is also an inbuilt hook. We'll go through what is the purpose of it. So just try to understand the concepts of this. So now what we'll do here, in control component, I'll just create an input. Input. And then what I'll do, I'll just add a h2 tag, h3 tag. My name is. So what I need to do is, as I type in the inside the input, so now what I'll do, I'll just copy paste this controlled in my app component so that it will be displayed inside the browser. So now what I'll do, I'll just go to my home. Inside home, inside app, outside the routes itself, I'll call my component, which is the controlled. So now once I call this data gets rendered here. You can see my name is, and then you have an input here, right? So, but what I need to do, as I type on this, I need this data to appear here. Okay. So how do I achieve that? So whenever you're using a control component, first you need to define a state. How do you do that? Const name comma set name is equals to use state. Inside this, I'll just keep it as empty. So now what you need to do is the first step is value is equals to, you need to set your state as the value. And then every input has an event called as onChange. So inside onChange, you need to create an inline arrow function. This arrow function, what it will do, it will set the data. So here set it's what I'll do. So every arrow function which is inside an event will be able to access a property called as event. Okay. This is the syntax. So don't get confused by this. I'm just trying to set the state here. This is the syntax on how to set a state. So once here, e.target.value. So this is how you access the data from your event. So now what I'm basically doing is I'm creating a state and then attaching the state to this value. So once you attach this, so whenever there is something change in it, I'm using set state to change my state data. So now if I call this state inside my JSX, so now what happens is, you can see here, As I type here, you can see the name also gets displayed. If I type Shiva, you can see the name gets displayed. The reason why it gets displayed here because this form data is handled by the state. That means this is a controlled component. So now we'll see what is an uncontrolled component. So in an uncontrolled component, use something called as ref. Okay. So how do you access ref? It is a inbuilt hook. You can see here, use ref. So, and then the syntax is I have included this in the PPT itself. So if it is confusing, you can go through this code again. So the syntax is const input ref is equals to use ref. Here you can give a empty string. So now similar way, I'll create another input here. Okay. This input, what I will do, it has a property called as ref, and then I'll attach my input ref. Okay. So now what happens is, so instead of state, I'm attaching the ref here. You can see in the control component, I'm attaching the state here, right? But inside the uncontrolled, I'm attaching a ref. So now all the data will be accessed inside the ref. So here I don't have to use on change and all. You can see I have included in the PPT. You don't have to use on change and all. You can directly access the value using the ref. So how do I access this? So for that, you need to click on some event. For example, like I'll create a button. So once you can see it is showing an error because what does JSX return? Single div, right? So now I need to add this inside the div itself. So I'll create a button here, show name. Then I'll create h2, name is, as of now, keep it in. So now what I'll do, I'll call this uncontrolled component inside my app. So I'll comment this. I'll call my uncontrolled component. So now my uncontrolled component gets appeared. So name is. So to difference it, I'll just add a title here. HR means horizontal row. So now you can see I've created an uncontrolled component. So now here the data is accessed through useRef. So how to access that? So first you need to create a useRef and then attach it inside your input. So once this is attached, you create a click function inside a button. So now I'll create a handle click. So now I'll define this function outside. So usually what functions you use? Arrow functions, right? Const handle click. Just a minute. Handle click is equals to, here you will be able to access the event parameter. So now here what you need to do is I'll just console log and see whether I'm able to access this. So now what I will do, input ref dot current dot value. So now I'll just check whether I'm getting whatever data I'm typing inside the console. So how to access console? Right click, go to your console, refresh this, all the errors will go. So now if I type, I'm not getting it because this is not handled by the state. So if I click on see, you can see I'm able to access inside the console. If I click on RAM, you can see I'm able to access here. Okay, if I Rohan, you can see I'm able to access Rohan. So now how to access this inside my JSX? I need to create a variable, attach this data to my variable, right? So what I'll do, here I'll create a variable. Name is equals to, I'll create an empty string. I'll make it let because I need to modify this. So here, name is equals to, I'll just copy paste this input dot ref dot current dot value. So this is the syntax on how do you access your value using useRef. So here you used use state because this is a control component. So in uncontrolled, you use useRef. So now I'll access this name inside my JSX. So now you can see, if I refresh this, if I type here, it doesn't get appear. But if I click on this button, doesn't get appear. The reason is why? because I'm using the what? Variables. So what does React do? React doesn't care about variables. Okay, so for this, you need to define a state and then set the value to the state and then access it inside the name key. Okay, so now you got the syntax, right? Similar way, so you can see here, whatever data I'm typing here, you can see it's getting console log inside my application. If I type Kiran, I'm able to access Kiran. But with the control component, what happens? You can see here, if I type right, this is not displaying parallel because this is not handled by the state. This is handled by the input ref. But if I use uncontrolled component, I'll comment this and I'll uncomment controlled. You can see here, as I type, I'm getting the value here. If I type Kiran, I'm getting the Kiran value because this is handled by the state. So this is the difference. So you can go through the PPT here. Included all the like a theory part of it. So this you understood, right? So what is controlled and uncontrolled? So now we'll go to what is use memo and use callback. So in React, there is some hooks called as use memo and use callback. So these hooks are rarely used. So say for example, only if you're developing an application which is too complex and if you're in a senior level, then only these hooks are suggested to be used. Or else these hooks you'll be rarely coming across. So since we are not using these hooks in our application, I'll just go through the theory of it so that you'll get an idea of how to use these hooks in the future. So there is a hooks called as use memo and use callback. So the basic work of this is there is something called as memoization. So what is memoization means? Say for example, you have some function or else some expression which takes a long time to execute. Okay. So now what happens is whenever a component component gets re-rendered, so what React will do? React will re-render everything, right? So whatever variables is there, whatever expressions, whatever function is there, every function gets recreated again. So if a function gets re-rendered 20 times, all the functions and then all the logic and all will be regenerated 20 times. So to avoid this, use two functions. One is called as use memo and use callback. So what you do is, so whichever function you know, which is very expensive, means which takes a long time to execute, and then you don't want to execute it whenever a component gets rendered, you just add it inside your use memo and use callback. You can see the syntax here. I'll just show how do you access it. You can go here itself. So I'll go to my home and I'll show how do you access that use memo. I'll go to my home. Inside here, you can see here, there's a function called as use memo. It takes a callback function. So whichever, so here what happens is all the, wait, here. What happens is, so whatever data is there inside my expression use memo, so what it does is whenever this home component gets re-rendered, and then it will take on another called as dependency array. So what happens is whenever this home component gets re-rendered, so what happens is, so whatever variables which are defined here, it gets re-executed again, right? So to avoid that, if you add those variables inside your use memo and then you give a dependency array, so whenever the value changes, only that time this gets re-rendered. Or else, even though the component gets re-rendered, whatever is there inside, it doesn't get re-rendered. So did you avoid it? So so to avoid re-rendering of the components again and again, or else all the expressions, so use memo. Say for example, you need to avoid re-rendering of functions. So you'll use a hook called as use callback. So I'll share this PPT with the man. So I'll share it. So you can go through the theory part of it. So the thing is, so these hooks are rarely used. So you don't have to get much worried about these hooks. So you just need to mainly concentrate on use state, useRef, and useEffect. Okay. So these are just used for memoization. That's it. That means to avoid multiple re-renders. Okay, next we'll see something called as properly. So the thing is, what happens is, say for example, you have some 20, 30 components. So what is my A is my root component, right? So, and then you have B and C, which is my child component. And then you have, again, B has some children, C has some children, and then J has some child. And then J has some child, which is called as I. So now the thing is, in React, whenever you're developing a React application, so you'll come across a common error called as prop drilling. The thing is, how do you pass data from parent to child using props, right? So say, for example, I want you guys only to think of it. So say, for example, if the data is in there in A, I need to send the data to I component. So how do I send it? I can't directly send it, right? So what I need to do is I need to pass the data as props to C. You can see here, props name. And then what C will do? C will pass the data again to the G. What G will do? G will again pass the data to I. So what is happening here is, even though C and G doesn't require this data, but they are getting the data, right? The data is required only by the I, but I can't directly send the data to I. That's now how props work, right? I need to pass it to the child. This child will pass it to another child will pass it to this child. You understood this? So say, for example, here we have only 4 components. Say, for example, you have some 200 to 300 components, and then you need to pass the data from parent to your 300th component. So what you need to do, you need to pass 300 times, which becomes a huge lot of work. So to avoid that, what React did is, so you have two solutions in React. So one is inbuilt solution, which is called as useSelector, useContext. And then the another solution is called as a Redux. So Redux is a third-party application, whereas useContext is a inbuilt. So now you understood what is prop drilling, right? So whenever you go to any React interview, so this is the most commonly asked question. So what is prop drilling and how do you avoid it? So the thing is, whenever there are multiple components, you need to pass the data multiple times. So to avoid that, you'll use context. Okay. So what is useContext? So useContext is nothing but a inbuilt hook, which is with this, you can access the value directly. How do you access it? I'll show in the code how do you access it. With this, you can avoid prop drilling. You can see this statement here. It basically avoids prop drilling. So how does it avoid prop drilling? You can see in the diagram here. What happens is, you'll create value separately. Okay. And then you'll create something called as a context. Okay, this context will create a provider and then it will set a value. So what our value is there, whenever I call those value inside this context provider, all those components will be able to access it. This is the theory part of it. If you're getting confused, we'll go through the coding part and see how it will work in the real world application. So now you understood what is the use of useContext, right? It is used to avoid prop drilling. So what is prop drilling? You can see in the diagram itself. To avoid this, we use useContext. Okay. So now the first syntax is, first you need to create a context. Okay. How do you do that? First, what I'll do, I'll go to my home itself. So here I'll create everything. So inside home, what I'll do is I'll comment this controlled and uncontrolled components. So now you can see there is just home here, right? So inside home, what I will do is, it's better if I do inside here itself. I'll comment this also, routing also. I'll just create one component. I've commented everything. Now you can see there is empty here. So here what you first need to do is, you can see in the PPT first, you need to create a context. So how do you create a context? You need to import create context. So for that, first const context is equals to create context. Once this is imported from React, the second thing is, you need to call this context inside your return JSX. So now at the last, what I will do, I'll call my context. So whenever you call a context, if you use dot, you can use a property called as a provider. Okay. This is how you first, the step one is, I'll remove this so that it won't be confusing. The step one is you need to create a context. Once you created a context, what it does is you need to use context.provider. So every provider, so you can see in the name itself, provider means it will provide something, right? So similar way, what will provide here? Will provide something called as value. You can see in the diagram here. What does the context provide? It provides value. So now here what I will do, I'll use value is equals to, I'll create an object and then I'll create. So what I'm doing is I'm creating a property called as password, which is there inside the value. So how do you provide this? Using context.provider. This is the syntax on how do you provide. You need to provide the context inside the parent component. So which is my parent app.jsx. First create a context and then using provider, you can set the value. So here, since value is an object, you can create any number of properties. It's up to you. You can create functions, variables. So it's up to you. So here, as of now, I'm just creating a password. So now what I need to do is I need to access this password inside my all the components. Okay. How do like how can I access it? So for that, you need to call those components inside your provider. You can see in the PPT. How do you do that? So first you need to call which component home. So now, and then I'll call about. So instead of passing props, you are passing data through provider. So now whatever the components is inside, they can access the value. So how can they access the value? For that, what you need to do is first go to the home component. You can see there is something called as useContext. Okay. So now I'll say that how do you access the data? So inside home, first you need to import useContext. Once this is done, which context you need to use? Which one you need to use? I'll show this, right? Context. So for that, what you need to do, I'll just export this. What I'll do, I'll write it outside the component. Okay. So now I have exported this context. So now what I need to do is I need to use this context inside my, where is my home? Use context. The thing is, use context, you need to specify which context you're using. Which context I'm using? This one, right? Context. If you're getting confused, I'll create my context. Okay. You can rename this as my context and then I'll rename here also. Okay. So now what I'm basically doing is I'm creating a context using provider. I'm setting a value. So here you can pass any number of values. It's up to you. And then I need to define which components to access this value property. So I can see there is home. So now what I'll do, I'll go to home. Using useContext, I will import my context. Once you will call this function, every function returns a value, right? So what I'll do, I'll access this. So how do you access? Context, data is equals to useContext. So this is a variable name. It's up to you. You can use anything. So now what I will do, I'll try to access this inside my JSX home component. I'll create another H3 password. Yes. How to access flower brackets, right? Data. So now you can see here what happens is it throws an error. Objects are not validated because the reason why it's saying error, here you can see value is a object. Inside object, there is a property called password, right? I need to access this password. So what I need to do that data dot password. So now you can see inside home, I can access this password. You can say this. There is a home component and I am able to access the password. Okay. So now say for example, you need to access the password inside your about component. So how do you access that? Similar way, you need to first use context. and then which context you're providing, and then access it, and then use dot password. You can see in the PPT itself. This is how you use context. The reason why you use context is to avoid prop drilling. This is the diagram. You can see here first. You'll create a value, and then you create a context. This context will provide. So what you can see in the diagram here, it will provide. What will it provide? A value. And then you need to call the components who can access this value. Once these two steps are done, the third step is you need to consume. So how do you consume? You use a syntax called as useContext and then pass your context inside. So this returns a value. With this value, you can use however you want. You understood this concept? I know at the starting it will be confusing. So as you try to do some projects, try to go through this video and PPT again, you'll get familiar with it. So the key thing to learn anything new is first try to get familiar with it, then try to get into deep. So at starting itself, if you get into deep, you won't be able to learn anything. So first try to get familiar with the concepts. Okay. So now you understood what is use context. So this use context is inbuilt. Okay. So now this is okay for smaller applications. Say for example, if I want to build something like Netflix or else like Flipkart, Amazon, you cannot use context. The thing is, use context, even though it's good, it avoids prop drilling, but it has its own limitations. Okay, it doesn't work well in bigger applications. So to process this, what third-party team did is they invented something called as Redux. Okay, so what is Redux? Redux is nothing but your state management application. So what is state management? You know the data. So whatever data which changes in the React is called as state, because React doesn't care about variables. So you need to create states and then you need to pass props. So only when these two change, React will re-render. You understood this? So now what you need to do is first you just get to know what are the concepts in Redux, and then we will see how do we just a minute. Yeah. So first, what you need to do is just get to know the familiarity of what are the Redux and the concepts, and then we will see how do we set up the Redux in our application. So Redux is nothing but a JavaScript library which helps for state management. What is state management? That means instead of passing props to all the childrens, and which causes to a problem called as what? Prop drilling, right? So to avoid prop drilling, what you need to do is you can use context or else Redux. Redux is usually used for bigger applications. So why Redux? You can see here, it stores application in a single centralized store. So helps manage global state and avoid prop drilling. So the thing is, what happens is, say for example, if you have some, I'll show a better diagram. You can see here. Here what's happening is, without Redux, what happens is you can see there are some 20 components. So say for example, if the upper component needs data from the lower, the lower should pass again. So if another component wants this data, it needs to pass twice, thrice, four times. So it's kind of like not unorganized, right? So to make it organized, so what Redux did is they created something called a store. So this store contains all your states and data. So whenever a component wants a data, what it does is it will create the data inside the store and then it will access the data from the store. With this way, the code flow is organized. Did you get this? So here, if 20 components have 20 different data, and then this data should be passed among each other, it becomes hectic, right? So to avoid this, what Redux did is they created a store which is centralized. That means every component can access this store. Okay. So whatever data is there inside the store, every component can directly access. So with directly access, what can we eliminate? We can eliminate props. So you don't have to pass data to different components and then worry about whether the component has been able to get the data or not. We just create a store and then the component will call the store to get the data. Okay. So now in Redux, you understood, right? It is a third-party application for state management. It uses a concept called as a store, where the data is single and centralized. That means your state is global. That means every component can access your state. So you don't have to worry about props and props drilling and all. This also it is used to avoid prop drilling. So next we will see the concepts in Redux. So the concepts in Redux are, there is something called as a store. We went through what is a store, right? Store is used to contain all the data. And then you have something called as actions. So what actions does is, so whatever data which is there inside the store, you cannot directly modify it. First, you will create an action object. So this action object contains two properties. Okay, so first property name is called as type. So what does type does is, it will specify what action I'm doing. Say, for example, you need to add a new data, you'll create new data adding, or else say, for example, you need to delete a data, delete new data. So this is up to you. You can create whichever string you want. And then payload means your data. Okay, we'll see how do you set up this. And then to trigger this actions, you'll create something called as reducers. So what are reducers? Reducers are nothing but functions. Based on the action, it will execute the logic and then change and generate a new state. Okay. So then you have something called as dispatch. So every component, what it does is, so since the data is there inside the store, you cannot directly access it. Okay. So what you'll do is every component will dispatch a action. Once it dispatches an action, so what we'll do, this reducers based on the action type, it will return a new state. Okay, you can see in the diagram here, you can see every component, what it does is, you can see there is a component, there is a reducers, there is an action, and then there is a store here, right? So whenever there is some, you can see there is a hand icon here. So whenever there is a click or something inside the component here, so what it does is this component will dispatch an action. So once it dispatch an action, so this action, it will go through the reducer. So based on whatever action it is there, this reduce will execute that logic and then return a new state. So once it return a new state, component will update the UI. Okay, this is the process on how to use the Redux and Redux concepts. So in the market, there is something called as Redux toolkit. So the thing is, Redux is old. You can see in the diagram here. So Redux is kind of old. Redux toolkit is the new kid in the block. Okay, so most of the teams, so even the Redux team only suggest don't use Redux, but you should have to use Redux toolkit. The thing is, Redux is heavy weighted. That means you'll get so many boilerplate code. You should have to set up manually middleware store enhancers, and then you should have to handle different reducers. The thing is, it will become bulky. As the application grows, it will be hard to manage it. So with Redux toolkit, what they did is they have simplified the process. Okay. So the thing is, both are from the same company itself, but Redux is kind of old, but Redux toolkit is the new way of how do you handle this state management. Okay. So now, before that, we'll use a hook called as useEffect. And then we'll see through like, why do we need useEffect? The thing is, I kept useEffect as last because this hook is usually used to handle your APIs, or else there is something called as side effects. So side effects means something like data fetching, or else something like DOM manipulation, event handling. So all this comes under your side effects. So to handle this side effects, you use useEffect. So if you know Angular, this useEffect is used to handle something called as life cycles inside a component. So what are life cycles? So whenever a component gets rendered, you need to trigger a function. And then when it gets destroyed, you need to trigger a function. So all this can be able to achieve using useEffect. So useEffect is nothing but a hook. This is usually used to handle side effects. So what are side effects? Something like data fetching from the backend through API, and then event subscription, and then DOM manipulation. Now we will see how to fetch the data from the backend using useEffect. Okay. So for that, I want you guys to go to your Google Chrome, and then here search for free public API. Once you search this, go to the first link. So here what you'll do is, you can, if you have some backend, you can connect with the backend. So since I don't have the backend, I'm using free public APIs here. So you can here in the selection, click on most popular. So let's see some cool APIs which we can use in our application. So Harry Potter is okay, but let's scroll down. There is football, data, real time, coffee. There is music, Pokemon, weather, cat API. Yeah, this is okay, I guess. So there is something called as Dragon Ball API. So once you click on this, you can see the copy link here. Copy and then paste it inside the browser. Let's see which data we are getting from the backend. You can see this data is in the JSON format. That means I can successfully access this data inside my React. Okay. So now you can see inside the data, there is something called as items. So inside item, you have an ID, name, and then some different properties, and then an image. Okay. So now let's try to use this JSON and then build a small mini project. Okay. So for this, what I need to do is first I need to access this JSON data in my React, right? So how do I do that? You need to use useEffect. So the syntax is what I'll do. I'll create another component here. So I'll come to my app.jsx. I'll remove everything. Sorry. I need to just remove this thing. So now what I'll do, inside component, I'll create a new component called as Dragon Ball. Dragon Ball Z dot JSX. Okay. Once this is done, you need to create RAFCE. Hit enter. So once this is done, what you need to do is here the syntax on how to use the effect is first you need to use EFF ECT, and then every use effect takes a callback function. Create a function with cloud brackets, and then you'll be having something called as a dependency array. This is the syntax on how do you create a use effect. This is called as dependency array. Okay. So what does this dependency array do is whenever you, for example, the thing is, you can see here, I'll just log something. The thing is, so if you just have a use effect, so whenever this Dragon Ball Z component gets rendered, this use effect will run automatically. So if this component gets rendered 20 times, this use effect gets rendered 20 times. So say, for example, I need to render use effect only once when the component gets rendered. So for that, you need to attach an empty dependency array. So if this array is empty, that means this use effect will get executed only once the first time this component gets rendered. Okay. The second time it doesn't get rendered. So if inside you can add some property. So if the property change, this will get triggered or else it won't get triggered. This is up to you. So now I just want this function to execute only once. So I'm using an empty. So if I add something here, so based on the changes, it will re-execute again. Okay. So now what I need to do is I need to create a function to fetch the data. So how do you do that? Const fetch data. I'll make this async, and then I'll create a arrow function. So now here you need to use a package called as Axios. Okay, what is Axios? Axios you use to handle use HTTP methods inside your React application. So for that, what you need to do? Terminal, new terminal. Here you need to first what you need to do. You need to stop this right application. So here Control C, yes. So here npm I Axios. So what is Axios? If you are getting confused with the packages, go to your npm and then search Axios. So here you can see Axios is used to handle your HTTP request. You can see Axios. So what does Axios do? It is to make HTTP request from Node.js or else React or else it's anything. So now this is the command on how to install Axios. you can see there is documentation on how to use Axios. You can see there are so many lines of documentation here. So if you want to get more into this topic, you can go through this npm. So now this has been successfully installed. So how do I know whether a package has been installed? You need to check inside your package.json. If you go here, you can see inside dependencies, I have Axios. That means I can access this inside my React application. So after this, you need to run the app again, npm run dev. Okay. So now what happens is now the application is running. So now what I need to do is I need to access this Dragon Ball Z data, right? So for that, what I need to do, I need to copy this link. Okay, in this right, you can copy this link here. So once you copy that link, you need to go to your Dragon Ball Z component. In here, since this is an asynchronous function, so what is the syntax on using an asynchronous function? You guys should be familiar with the JavaScript, right? You need to always use try and catch. Whenever you create an async, you need to use try and catch. This is syntax on how do you handle asynchronous operations. So this concept comes under your JavaScript. Okay. So now here what I'll do, I'll try to access the data. First, I'll just console log to check whether I'm able to access the data. So what I'll do, const data is equals to Axios. It's not getting here. That means why? I have not imported. So first I need to import. So come here, import Axios from Axios. So now once this is done, you can use this Axios. So how do I do that? So inside your try block, Axios dot, which HTTP method I need to use here? I'm getting the data, right? So in the name itself is there, get. So once you do this, brackets, paste that string here. Okay. So now once you do this, I'll try console logging this to check whether I'm getting the data. I'll just create a response. I'll rename this as response, not data. So what do I get from the Axios? I'll get a response, right? I'll console log this response. Okay, so now let us check whether I'm getting anything inside my application. You can see nothing because I have not called my Dragon Ball Z component. I'll go here, I'll call my Dragon Ball Z component. Dragon Ball Z. Now you can see there is still nothing here because why? You can see there is just the data here, but there is nothing inside the console. Why? I have not called my fetch data. You can see I've just defined the fetch, but I'm not calling this, right? Without calling, the function doesn't get triggered. So for that, inside useEffect, you need to call that function. So what I'm basically doing is, if this is empty, this useEffect will run once. So once it gets run, this function gets called. So this it will go here. This function will get execute. It will try to fetch the data from the Axios using get HTTP method. It will store inside response, and then I'm console logging the response. If I get the error, I'll console log the error also. So log error. So now you can see whether I'm able to access the data here. I'll refresh. You can see I'm getting a promise. Okay. So now what I need to do is, the thing why I'm getting promise, there is a mistake here. With async, what you need to use? Await, right? Await. So now I will successfully get the data. I'll refresh this. You can see I'm getting the data here. You can see the different properties. But usually whenever you use Axios, there'll be a property called as data. Inside this data, you'll get the data. You can see inside items it is there, right? So now I need to access this data folder. So how do I do that? Response.data. Okay. Now I have successfully, now if I refresh this, you can see I'm able to access this data. Okay. So now you understood, right? How to fetch the data and how to use useEffect. So now what you need to do is, let us try to set up a Redux application. So you understood what is Redux, right? Redux concepts, and then what are the data. So if I want, say, for example, if I want to access this data inside my JSX, so what you need to do, you need to use a state, right? Const dragon ball data from a set dragon ball data is equals to use state, right? Sorry, right? Is equals to use state. What is this? This is an array. Okay. Now what you need to do is, using setter function, I need to set the data here. Okay. So items. So inside items, my data is there. You can see here. So refresh this. Inside items, I'm able to access the data, right? So what I'm doing, using data.items. Data.items means I can access this data. So now what I need to do to access this, first I'll try to just render it inside my JSX and see whether I'm able to get the data inside my JSX. So how do you do that? I'll create an H3. Information is, I'm getting this. So now here what I'll do, I'll add this HR down. So here I'll just here I'm getting an error because this is saying an object not valid. So for that, what you need to do, you need to loop it. Okay, dot map. So what does map contains? Takes a callback function. It contains the items and then a index. So once you do this, I'll return a div. So what does this div contains? So here, React, whenever you're using map, what you need to pass? You need to pass a key property, right? Key is equals to index. So now what I will do, I'll just try to access the image of it. So inside items, you have image, right? I'll just copy. I'll go here. I'll create a image tag. Inside SRC, what I'll do, item dot image. And then I'll set a width and height for it. The width, I'll make it 20 pixels. Height, I'll make this 20 pixels. So now I'll see whether I'm able to access the image. You can see I'll increase it a little bit more. I'll make it 80 and then 80. Yeah, now you can see the image. I'm able to access the images. So how am I getting these images? From the backend, right? Create 120. Yeah. You can see here, I'm successfully able to render the images. So where am I getting these images? I'm getting these images from my JSON. This is the JSON format. So how am I getting? So first, you need to use useEffect. So inside useEffect, what you need to do? First, you need to create a fetch data, and then using Axios, you need to use HTTP GET method. So inside async await, you need to use try and catch block. Inside that, you need to create a state, and then you need to set the state to the data, whichever response you're getting. So once you do this, you need to call this function inside your useEffect. So once you call this, and then you need to access this. You cannot directly access Dragon Ball data. The reason is this is an object, or else you can see this is an array by default. So for that, you need to use a map function, and then you need to access two items, item and index. So what it does is it will go through each and every items, and then every item I'm attaching it to an image. So let us see if there is any another property for this. I'll go to my inspect console. I'll try to refresh this. You can see And here in items, what is the name? You can see the name. So this is the planet name, right? So I'll try to access this name here. What I'll do, above the image, I'll create another H4 planet name. How to access? Index.name. Sorry, item.name, right? So now you can see here. So this planet name is Namek. This is Triera. This is Vegeta. You can see this data and all, it's dynamic, right? So now if I want to add a another property, I'll go here, I'll check. Is there any another extra property is destroyed? I don't want the description. So now what I need to do, I'll come here below this planet. After the image, I'll add a description. I'll add below the name itself. I'll create a p tag, ESC, short form for description, and then item dot description. So now you can see I'm just creating 4 lines of code here, but here you can see I'm getting so much data over here. You can see this, right? How is this possible? Using loops. That means this data is generated dynamically. So similar way, whenever you write your backend using APIs, this is how you can access your data. Okay. This same concept is how all your big tech companies like Amazon, Flipkart, Netflix and all, for each and every movie icon, they don't generate a HTML. So what they'll do using APIs, they will loop and they'll access the properties. You can see each has a planet, name, description, and then an image. Name, description, image. You can see there are so many items. So in here you have just some 20 items. So you have some 300 to 400 items. You don't have to worry. You just put it inside a loop. Try to access those properties. You can successfully access it. Okay. This is how you use useEffect. So now we have covered most of the concepts. So now we'll just see how do we set up our Redux toolkit. The first is you need to install 2 packages. First, come here. Go to terminal, new terminal. And then I'll stop this. Right. And then this is the command npmi @reduxjs/toolkit. So once this is done, you need to install another package. This package name is npmi react redux. These 2 packages are necessary to run your Redux application. Sorry. npmi react. Sorry. Yeah. So now once this is done, I'll check in my package.json whether I'm able to successfully install. Go to your package.json. You can see there is Redux and then React Redux. So once this is done, first you need to create a store. Okay, come to here, right click on this, and then create a store.js. Okay, once you do this, you need to configure the store. So how do you do that? So first thing is, you need to import from add and then configure store. So once you do this, you need to create a store here. The syntax is const store is equals to configure store. So this has a property called as a reducer, which is an object. So now once this is done, you need to export this as a default store. This is the syntax on how do you create a store. First configure store, and then you need to add a property called as a reducer. I'll say why you need to add this. So just this is the syntax. Try to remember this, and then you need to export this. So the second step is, first you need to set up a store. We'll come to what is slice. So before that, first set up a store. Once after that, you need to provide the store in main.jsx. So for that, what you need to do, go to your main.jsx. Inside here, you need to import something called as a provider from React Redux library. Select React Redux and then provider. Okay. So here you need to wrap it around the app. Okay. PRO provider. So I'll remove this browser router since we are not going through what routing is. We understood what is routing. So inside provider, I'll wrap my root component, which is my app. Okay. So here what you need to do is you need to use the similar syntax to use context. So what is store is equals to store. Okay, it gets imported. Once you import this and then you need to attach. This is similar to your use context, right? In use context also, where is my use context? Inside home. You can see there is something called as not home. I guess I removed it. So this is similar with the use context, right? You'll say set up a value is equals to the data. Similar way, store is equals to store. Which store? The store, which I configured. So now once you do this, you need to create something called as a slice. For that, what I'll do is I'll create a drag and ball slice. I'll just create a counter slice. .js. So once you do this, the syntax on how to create a slice is, first we'll get to know what a slice is. The thing is, since we know that store is centralized, right? It become hard. The thing is, it will become very hard for us to handle multiple states. Say, for example, you have Dragon Ball data, so you'll create a Dragon Ball state. And then you have a counter, you'll create a counter state. And then you have some to-do list, to-do data, to-do state, and then student state. So to handle all these states together, it will become a huge hectic of work. So what Redux team did is, so every state you can split it as a slices. So each slice is responsible to handle its particular state. Okay. So this is the theory behind the slice. The thing is, multiple slice will become your store. So instead of creating a single store and handling everything inside, so what we did is we create different slices and then we handle the different states using those particular slices. Okay. This is the theory. We'll see how do we do that. So first you need to import from at Redux toolkit. So here what you need to do, create slice. So once you import this, you need to create your counter slice, right? Const counter slice is equals to create slice. So once you do this, inside the function, you need to create an object. Okay, this object contains some inbuilt properties. So first property name is name. You don't have to by heart this. You just see the topics and then understand the concepts so you can practice it later. So the thing is, first you need to create a name for each and every slice. So what is slice? Slice is nothing but a small part of your store. So you'll create different store slices and then you configure it as a store. Okay. So for this, I'll create a counter. Then you need to create an initial state. Initial state, I'll just create 0. It's up to you. You can create 0. You can create an empty array or else you can create object. It's up to you. I'll create it as 0. So then after that, you'll create something called as reducers. So what are reducers? So whatever data or logic you need to, I'll create a comment here. All the state changing logic handled in reducers. So whatever logic you need to use to change your state data, you need to add it inside your reducer function. So the point of this is that starting it's confusing because Redux is a very complex application. The thing is to make it compact together. So we'll create everything at a single time. So here what I'll do, I'll just create incree. So I'll create add. Okay. The syntax is, I'll just show the syntax, state and then action. This is an arrow function. Okay. So now, and then I'll create another called as sub. I'll create a state action. Okay. So now I'll create I'll go to my home component. I'll try to access this initial state here. So where is my home component? I'll try to access inside the app.jsx. So inside I'll comment this. So now what I need to do is, I'll just create an H3 counter. How do I access that? You have something called as useSelector. Okay, so for that, first you need to import it. Import from. I know this is hard to catch up with because this liquid. So to understand Redux toolkit, you need to practice as much as you can. At the starting, it's very tough to understand. So as you see the code, as you see someone working on it, you can easily understand this. So here you need to, what you need to access in useContext, we add something called as useContext, right? In context. Similarly, in Redux toolkit, you have something called as useSelector to use it inside your React component. So for that, how do you access it? You use selector. And then since this is a function, you need to call this. Where do you call? Inside your app. Const useSelector. So this useSelector takes a callback function. From this callback function, you need to see which you need to access. Okay, what this callback function does is first, it will access the store, and then inside store, I need a counter. But is there a counter inside store? Let's check. Where is my store? There is no counter, right? So for that, what I need to do is, in counter slide, you need to export your reducer. Export default counter slice dot reducer. So once you export this, you need to attach this inside your store, inside your reducer. So what is my slice name? You know what is slice, right? Slice is nothing but a part of your store. So here inside this, I'll create counter and then I need to import my counter reducer. Okay. What's the name? Counter reducer. Wait, I'll just import this itself, counter slice, so that it will be easy for me to import. Now you can say I'm getting counter slide dot reducers. Okay, so this is easy for me. So now once you do this, so now we'll see how to access that. Go to your app.jsx, this data, I'll access it here. And now we'll see whether I'm able to access. I'll refresh this. Wait, I'm not running my application, right? I need to run my application. Now it is running 5173 on refresh. You can say counter is 0. So now if I change the slice value, right, I'll change it to initial state to, I'll create a string. Now you can see how I'm able to achieve this. First, you create a store. Inside store, you configure store, and then you add a property called as reducer. So inside reducer, you define a slice. So these are nothing but your slices. Okay. So each slice handles a part of your application. So once you create a slice, how do you create a slice? Using create slice. And then it contains a name, initial state, and then reducer functions. So these functions handles your logic. So as of now, we are not seeing how to handle logic. We are just saying how do we access this state data. So once we do this, what we need to do, we need to export it as a default. And then you need to attach it inside your counter. So once this part is done, how do I access? You can see how given the steps inside the PPT. How do you access using useSelector? Using useSelector, I'll go to map.jsx. I'll create a callback function, counter.store.counter, because there is a counter property inside my store. You can see here. This property I'm trying to access here. Once I'm able to access, this returns the data. This data I'm attaching inside my JSX. Similar way, what you can do is you can define functions and then you can try to change this data. So we went through all the topics, I guess. I'll just give a quick revision. It's already 9. So we understood what is routing. So for routing, you use React Router DOM. And then you create browser router, routes and route, and then link, and then how do you set up navigation window. Second is controlled and uncontrolled. So controlled, the form data is handled through states, whereas uncontrolled, the form data is handled through refs. And then use memo and use callback. So these hooks are rarely used, so you don't have to worry about this. Just go through the theory part of this. So this is just used for memoization. That means it avoids re-rendering. Then we understood what is the problem with prop drilling. And then we found the two solutions, right? The solution one was inbuilt, which is context. In context, you set up a value, and then using provide, you provide, and then you access them using useContext. But this is used for smaller applications. You cannot use this for the bigger applications. So for bigger applications, you use Redux. Redux is a third-party package to handle your states, or else your state management. What it does is it sets up the store which is global. And then we went to what is the store, action, reducers, and then selectors, and then dispatch. You can see in the diagram here. You can see you can create, this is a store. There are different slices. Each slice will handle its own data and then its reducers. And then we understood what is the difference between Redux and Redux toolkit. Redux is kind of old, but they belong to the same company, so you don't have to get confused. So majority of the time you will be using Redux toolkit. And then we understood what is useEffect, and then we saw how we access this JSON data, the Dragon Balls is JSON data, and then how we access the images, different text and all. Then after that, we understood how do we set up how do we set up our Redux toolkit using these two commands, and then how do you create a slice, how do you create a store, how do we provide, and then how do we use it. Okay. So now this finishes your React. So I want you guys to finish the calculator project also. So coming from Monday, we'll start with Node.js, Mongo, and then Next.js. So if I have any doubts, you can ask in the comment section. So other than that, yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, sir. So students, as you all know, like Saturday and Sunday, we don't have any sessions. So we are meeting up again on Monday at 7:30. So inform your friends as well, like tomorrow and day after tomorrow, that is weekends, we don't have a session. Okay. Yeah, we are winding up for the day. Thank you all. Good night.